hot. It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, sports betting across the state of North Carolina is now officially 1 year old, and it has had a tremendous impact in more ways than one in its first year. According to the North Carolina State Lottery Commission, account holders in the state have placed more than $6.6 billion in paid and promotional bets, while players have won more than $5.85 billion. Bettors have to claim the income on their state taxes and pay income tax on their winnings without being able to deduct losses. There has been some legislation introduced to deal with that. House Bill 14 would change that if it becomes law. Its sponsors describe it as a matter of tax fairness rather than a gambling bill. It seeks to correct what some lawmakers see as an unjust taxation of gross gambling winnings rather than net earnings. Since sports betting's launched in the state 1 year ago, the gross wagering revenue made by the 8th authorized sports betting operators totaled more than $713 million. After an 18% tax, the state is projected to receive more than $128 million in their end. For the use of that, well, $1 million will be annually given to the North Carolina Amateur Sports Association to expand opportunities in youth sports. Up to $300,000 annually will be doled out to 13 state universities and their athletic departments. $1 million annually to the North Carolina Youth Outdoor Engagement Commission, and certain reimbursements to the North Carolina Lottery Commission and the North Carolina Department of Revenue for expenses incurred for the implementation and the administration of that new law. With that remaining money, of which there will be plenty, 20% will be distributed evenly among those 13 state universities. 30% added to a North Carolina Major Events, Games, and Attractions Fund to foster job creation and investment in the state, and whatever's left, 50% of that to the state's general fund. So a massive revenue generator for the state of North Carolina just 1 year into sports betting. You can read some additional stats this morning by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:07, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are continuing to track a major legal battle that is ongoing in the state of North Carolina over who has the authority to appoint to the North Carolina State Board of Elections. This all revolves around some legislation passed last year by the North Carolina General Assembly. To walk us through what the legal challenges are and what is being said in court, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Mitch, appreciate the time this morning. Some major changes potentially on the horizon for the State Board of Elections if law stands. What are the arguments being made on both sides here?
You're right, Nick. You referenced the fact that late last year, the General Assembly passed legislation that would change the way appointments are made to the State Board of Elections and also oversight of the State Board of Elections. If nothing else happens, if there are no court orders, as of May 1st, the state auditor, a Republican named Dave Bullock, will be able to make new appointments to the State Board of Elections, basically reshaping that whole board. And because the law says that you can't have any more than 3 members of that board be from one political party, but it doesn't say which party that has to have the 3, you would probably see a shift from a 3-2 Democratic leaning board to a 3-2 Republican leaning board, since Bullock is a Republican. Now, Josh Stein, the current governor, doesn't want to see that happen. He filed suit not too long after this change was made in Senate Bill 382 to block this change from happening. And within the past week or so, he filed for a motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction that would block the auditor from making these new appointments on May 1st. The development that we've seen this week is that both sides in the case, which are trying to get a summary judgment in the lawsuit, meaning that the judges who decide this would look at the legal arguments from every side and then just make a ruling without having to have a trial. So both sides are seeking summary judgment. And what they did in court this week was file their arguments responding to the other side's arguments about why there should or shouldn't be summary judgment, either for Josh Stein on one side or the Republican legislators on the other. And it really comes down to what our state constitution says about what the General Assembly can do when it comes to the executive branch. The governor's argument is saying that there are core constitutional provisions saying that the governor is in control of the executive. And because of those provisions, the governor needs to have some level of control over an executive branch agency like the Board of Elections. Meanwhile, the General Assembly is arguing that, no, we don't have what is called a unitary executive where the governor is in charge of everyone. There are 9 other elected statewide executive branch officials and the General Assembly, which gets to spell out duties for those other executive branch officials, can assign duties like elections to another member of what is called the Council of State, in this case, the state auditor. And that's going to be something for the courts to sort out. Now, another piece of this that's interesting to keep in mind is that Dave Bolick, who didn't ask for this authority, has decided to get involved in the case. He has intervened as a defendant. He filed to respond to Josh Stein's motion, and basically in a very, you might say, spicy or salty piece of court filing, basically started one of his court filings by saying, why does the governor think he must own the state board of elections? The auditor is clearly on the side of giving the General Assembly the power to assign his office these duties, even though he never asked for the duty of overseeing elections.
Well, and obviously every state's constitution is a little bit different, Mitch, but in many other states, people are probably familiar with the Secretary of State being the one that is responsible for the Board of Elections. That's the case in more than a dozen states across the nation. So it's not like the governor is the only one that has this authority. Of course, every state's constitution is a little bit different. And so I guess the argument being made from the Stein team is that the Constitution does not give the authority to the General Assembly to dole this to anybody besides the governor?
Yes, in a small amount of words, that's the argument. I think they go a little bit beyond that by saying, the General Assembly can assign duties to these other offices, but the duties have to be somewhat in line with what people elected these people to do. They give sort of obvious crazy examples, such as giving transportation functions to the superintendent of public instruction. They say the General Assembly can't do that. So, why would you start them off on putting elections, which is not something that's dealt with by the auditor under the auditor's office? But the General Assembly's response is, look, we have the power as the ones writing the duties for these various constitutionally elected offices to say what the auditor does, what the superintendent does, what the labor commissioner does. And it's within our authority to be able to say that the state auditor is going to oversee elections. It's going to be very interesting to see how the courts respond to this and whether the courts rely on some recent precedents, one of them from 2016, which pitted then Governor Pat McCrory against the legislative leaders, and then another precedent from 2018 that pitted Roy Cooper against legislative leaders. In both of those cases, the governor won, the legislature lost. So the governor is really relying on those cases as precedent to say, look, the governor has these powers, the General Assembly can't take them away. The General Assembly is saying, no, this case is different because we're not trying to take powers away from the governor and give them to ourselves. We are taking the powers and giving them to another member of the Council of State, which is something we're allowed to do. It would still be under the executive branch of government, not the legislative, but it just wouldn't be under the governor. And the governor doesn't have the right to tell the auditor what to do. And the governor doesn't have all executive authority. Executive authority is split among these various statewide elected officials, the Council of State.
Mitch, as you mentioned at the beginning, state law is already in effect. It was passed by the General Assembly last year, overridden by the GA in opposition to Governor Roy Cooper's veto of that. That sets that May the 1st deadline, which isn't all that far away. Do we have any idea in terms of the turnaround, the scheduling for these decisions to be made by the courts?
As we're discussing, we haven't seen yet any hearing scheduled on this. Now, the Stein team has asked for a motion for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. So they're trying to get some sort of ruling relatively soon so that the appointments would not be made on May 1st. But I've not yet seen any court hearings scheduled on this. One of the complicating factors is this case was initially filed in Wake County Superior Court, and that's usually before one judge. But I think everyone realized that this is something that should go, because it's a facial constitutional challenge to a law, before a three-judge panel. The case has been assigned to a three-judge panel, but there is no three-judge panel yet that anyone knows of, and that panel hasn't scheduled anything. So we'll be waiting to see when there's going to be some sort of hearing. That hearing might take place initially before one judge, before the three-judge panel gets it, and the one judge would decide whether there's going to be some sort of temporary order blocking this change while all of the legal shenanigans play out in the courts.
It's a very interesting conversation. We'll continue to track it over at CarolinaJournal.com. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:16, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at the roadways on a Wednesday morning. A look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 522. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are tracking an update this morning on a legal challenge from the city of Carrboro against Duke Energy. And the details this morning is that Duke Energy has requested that the North Carolina Business Court dismiss the Carrboro lawsuit, which alleges that the utility company played a role in promoting climate change. In a legal brief, Duke Energy argues that climate change is a global issue caused by numerous sources over more than a century, and that Carrboro cannot single out the company for liability under North Carolina laws. The utility contends that the town lacks the authority to challenge energy policy decisions made by the state legislature and regulatory agencies, and Duke Energy also dismisses Carrboro's claim of, quote, a deception campaign, end quote, regarding climate change, stating that the lawsuit ultimately centers on global greenhouse emissions from billions of consumers. The company asserts that climate and energy policy decisions are reserved for lawmakers in the state as not the courts, and calls for the case to be dismissed due to lack of subject matter jurisdiction. Carrboro filed the lawsuit in December of last year with financial backing from the activist group NC Warn. That's a left-wing activist group across the state. And Duke Energy previously moved the case from Orange County Superior Court to the North Carolina Business Court. So we'll see if the business court there dismisses the claims against Duke Energy, or if they allow this to move forward with the town of Carrboro. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 524. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We have seen a huge rise in political threats of violence over the last couple of months across the United States. Some incidents happening here in North Carolina as well. To walk us through some of the recent stories in the news, a big one surrounding U.S. Senator Tom Tillis. Theresa Opeka, CarolinaJournal.com, joins us this morning on the News Hour. Theresa, thank you so much for the time. Some pretty disturbing voicemails being left at Senator Tillis's office. He's taken to social media and the internet to publish those. What are you tracking there?
Yes, good morning, Nick. Thanks for having me. So, yeah, lots of stuff to go over. The latest, Tom Tillis has gotten so many different phone calls with death threats, or just a woman saying that she had the joy of her week hearing all these different calls with the death threats, and, keep them coming. How someone said they're going to bash Tillis's head in with an axe handle, and it was giving her life. Other ones was the same guy had a pretty raunchy phone call saying he might just drive to North Carolina and shoot Tillis dead in the streets like the dog he is, describing what other things he would like to do or have other people do to his children and grandchildren in front of him. And then another call by the same guy said, well, you're all going to die. Talked about how the office would be blown up with the staffers inside, and that how all patriotic Americans would clap and thank this person for doing this. So just a tip of the iceberg. I mean, and Tillis, it's nothing new for Tillis, because we had a story last year that I wrote, Carolina Journal, where he was getting threatened. A woman was threatening to shoot him or cut him to a million different pieces for if he was going to vote on banning TikTok. So, and, like I said, it's been going on for a while, but it's been an increasingly, the problem has been increasing substantially over the past few months.
Yeah, and of course, some of the news last week, Chuck Edwards held a town hall out in western North Carolina. He was met with protesters and groups there. Theresa, it seems like we're transitioning. Obviously, individuals are not happy with elected officials. If you're a Democrat and there's a Republican in office, you're not happy. If you're a Republican and there's a Democrat in office, you're not happy with that. But these threats of violence are getting incredibly out of control, and it's something that we're seeing all across the board right now. And then actual violence taking place. You've got cars being burned in cities across America. You've got threats to individuals associated with individuals in Washington, D.C. and across the state. How do we turn this temperature down?
You know what? If I had that answer, I probably wouldn't be talking with you right now. I would have a bunch of money that I could go spend on a vacation and pay all my bills off and whatever. I don't know. I think it's going to be hard to tamper it down. But I think there's different groups who want to keep amping it up. And I don't have a clear, definitive answer for that. I think a lot of this has been perpetrated by different, social media, left-wing media, maybe mainstream media, which is more centered to the left. There's different groups out there we've mentioned in the article who are telling people, hey, go to this rally or go do this, or obviously a lot of them are being paid to show up at these rallies and do what they're doing. So I don't think there's one good answer. Like the horse left the barn a long time ago, as they say. So, but I think, something's going to have to be done somewhere. I just, that is a very good question, Nick. I really don't know.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up some of the groups and the agitation behind this. We've heard for decades now, Theresa, we've got to erase our partisan divides. We've got to erase the partisan lines. And there needs to be this kumbaya. Everybody needs to come together. But then you've got groups that are actively working against that and encouraging this kind of behavior, encouraging these kinds of phone calls for their constituents to make. It seems like on one hand, they say they want everybody to get together, yet on the other hand, they're encouraging this kind of activity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're like in the one group I referenced in the article, Indivisible. That's one that's left leaning and that says they're being paid to do that and ramping that up. I mean, you saw last year, but the assassination attempt for President Trump, the first one in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then later on, and then the left-wing media is like, well, yeah, call him Hitler, call him this, call him a fascist, call him whatever you want. And then you get the wrong people hearing that over and over and over, and it's going to perpetrate it. And it's going to go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, he is a racist. He is this, he is that. I'm something just snaps. All of this stuff needs to be tampered down. I think a lot of the left-wing media is starting to lose ground too, as you see there's been so many layoffs of things of that nature. People are really just not tuning in any longer. They're getting tired of hearing it. But you have the people who maybe are still hearing it, who it's not a good idea. They're already kind of like, I don't know, not mentally balanced at this point. And maybe, that's, for lack of a better word, that's their religion. That's what they're following right now. They don't have anything else to cling to at this point. So yeah, there's tons of those groups out there. And like you said, just don't have a good definitive answer. I think we all need to work together somehow to do this, but yeah, it's a good question, Nick.
So with this, I want to, of course, say some viewer discretion here because the voicemails that have the Senator Tillis has posted are incredibly explicit in terms of their language. But Theresa, I think they are important to listen to. You've got that up in your article this morning. Where can folks find that?
Sure. And they can head on over to carolinajournal.com. And of course, everything is bleeped out, but you can still make out what's being said. But yeah, head on over to carolinajournal.com for more information.
Theresa Opeka joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at traffic on this Wednesday morning. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:38. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are tracking some legislation in the General Assembly this morning as it relates to Hurricane Helene relief. That's because North Carolina lawmakers say they have reached a deal on a major relief package. With the State House voting yesterday to approve a new version of the bill they said is the final result of negotiations with Senate leadership. State lawmakers kicked off the 2025 legislative session in mid-January, saying that Helene aid would be a top priority. However, some disagreements over how to spend the bill's proposed $535 million in aid have delayed its approval over the last couple of weeks. But the newest version of House Bill 47, which did, as I mentioned, pass the House Tuesday afternoon with broad bipartisan support, is moving forward. So as long as the North Carolina Senate also officially signs off on it, which could happen as early as today, the bill will pass the legislature and make its way to Democrat Governor Josh Stein's desk, where he has said in the past, as recently as last week during his State of the State address, that he will sign this relief bill into law, even though it's only half of what Stein asked for. He asked for more than $1 billion from the GA. Representative Dudley Green, the Republican out of McDowell County, is a Western North Carolina lawmaker who led this legislation. He said that the end result of the debate between the House and the Senate is, quote, a very good compromise bill that we can send on. It is providing what is now our fourth round of relief for Hurricane Helene, ending the quote there from Representative Green. Lawmakers approved about $1 billion in late 2024 after the storm hit, but have yet to move this year to add any more to that total. Most of the money in this new relief bill will go towards rebuilding homes, farms, and privately owned roads damaged or heavily destroyed by the storm. The federal government is also expected to pay for more home rebuilding costs, but is yet to send North Carolina any of that money, and officials fear that they could be waiting months for the federal government to act. So this $535 million proposed package would let rebuilding processes begin and get started even despite those delays. Once House Bill 47 becomes law, the next step for any additional Helene aid will likely be in the state budget. Governor Stein is expected to roll out his own budget proposal today, and Republican legislative leaders, of course, don't have to listen to any of his recommendations, and they will likely ignore much of what Stein proposes. But both sides have indicated that there are going to be any areas of bipartisan compromise between Democrats and Republicans. It will be disaster recovery at the top of that list. In addition to hurricane relief money in House Bill 47, it would also provide funding to finish up the state's final efforts to rebuild homes damaged by Hurricane Florence and Matthew almost a decade ago. About 1,000 homes are still in limbo from those storms, with officials rushing to finish them ahead of rebuilding for Helene, and an estimated 74,000 damaged homes. Of course, we're talking about Eastern North Carolina relief, the saga that unfortunately has been NCORP, the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, led by former Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, has botched a large chunk of those recovery efforts. However, this piece of legislation, $535 million in aid, some of that money going to those folks and those families in Eastern North Carolina. We'll be watching the General Assembly today and track if this legislation moves forward, and then likely a very quick signature from Governor Josh Stein. We'll continue to track all the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and over on our website, carolinajournal.com. Well, going back 1 week during his State of the State address, North Carolina Governor Josh Stein pushed to make community college tuition free for all students entering high-demand fields. Here was the governor last Wednesday.
Our goal is to set the national pace in growing the number of skilled workers, including doubling the number of apprentices over the next 4 years, and empowering hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians to get the credentials that they need to secure a good-paying job. So I'm proposing that for students getting certified in high-demand sectors like advanced manufacturing or healthcare or IT, that we provide them free community college.
That was Governor Stein last Wednesday as he gave his State of the State address. Currently, tuition across the state's 58 community colleges averages $76 per credit hour for an average annual tuition of $3,915. In the fall of 2024, more than 406,000 students were enrolled in the North Carolina Community College system. The next NEXT NC scholarship already covers community college tuition for students from families making $80,000 a year or less annually. That scholarship combines state-level funds with the federal Pell Grant program to meet tuition requirements. A recent analysis by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill examined community college graduates from the class of 2016, some 5 years after they finished their certification or degrees. That analysis found a median income of $37,000 a year, but certain certifications and degrees were outliers on the upside, such as a holder of a fire protection technology certificate with a median average income of $65,000 a year, or an associate's degree holder in nursing, which has a median earning of more than $62,000 a year. While the idea of free tuition could resonate with some voters, critics have raised concerns about potential consequences, as the completion rates at North Carolina community colleges remain a significant hurdle statewide, with 50% of students completing at the two-year institution in 2024. In contrast, the completion rate for a four-year public university is over 76%. Jenna Robinson, the president of the Martin Center in North Carolina, said, quote, "North Carolina's community colleges are already extremely affordable thanks to taxpayers' generosity. Students who graduate with high-demand skills can expect an immediate return on their investment. What they need isn't necessarily free tuition, but more information about the opportunities that currently exist." House Speaker Destin Hall, the Republican out of Caldwell County, reaffirmed the Republican-led General Assembly's commitment to investing in the state's university and community college systems during his response to Stein's State of the State address. Hall described the state education system as, quote, "the best in the world," end quote, and emphasized the importance of higher education in attracting new businesses to North Carolina. So Governor Stein has requested that, or has made that pledge during his State of the State address. As I just mentioned, he was set to be rolling out his wants in his state budget proposal sometime later today. We'll maybe see that proposal in there, and then we'll see if there's any movement on that as the North Carolina General Assembly gets deeper into their budget session. You can read some additional details, including checking out some of those analysis from Chapel Hill and some other numbers and stats over on our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. The story: NC governor proposes free community college for high-demand sectors. It's now 5:46 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We will get another look at your early commute on a Wednesday morning, a look at traffic with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick.
It's 5:52. Good morning again. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. We're heading back to Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts on Wednesday, April the 16th from 7 to 9 p.m. for WBT's News and Brews. And, of course, we'd love to see you there. All of your WBT friends will be there to raise a glass with you and talk with you about just about anything that you could possibly want. It's WBT's News and Brews coming Wednesday, April the 16th at Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts. You can get tickets and event details this morning by visiting WBT.com. There's a banner right there on the homepage. Again, visit WBT.com for tickets and event details. Keeping an eye on some statewide news this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour, Governor Josh Stein and North Carolina Republican legislative leaders presented opposing views on the state's constitutional separation of powers, a conflict that could determine the outcome of a legal battle over appointments to the North Carolina State Board of Elections. Governor Stein is challenging Senate Bill 382, which was passed last year by the General Assembly. It shifts appointment authority from the governor to State Auditor Dave Bolick, who is a Republican, to appointments to the state board. Without court intervention, Bolick could make a new board appointment as early as May the 1st of this year. Stein argues that the law violates a 2016 court precedent by allowing the legislature to control executive functions, undermining the governor's authority. His lawyers claim that the bill would let lawmakers strip executive power from disfavored officials and place them under their new preferred appointees, fundamentally altering the state's balance of power. They assert that Senate Bill 382 is unconstitutional and should be blocked. So that's the argument being made by Democrat Governor Josh Stein and his team. On the other hand, Republican lawmakers counter that the governor is misrepresenting the state constitution, which they say allows the legislature to delegate executive duties, including things like appointments. They argue that transferring election board appointments to the state auditor aligns with the constitutional principles of the state and does not infringe on the separation of powers. Both sides are seeking summary judgments from a 3-judge panel to resolve the case without a trial. The lawsuit, known as Stein v. Berger or Stein v. Hall, is one of 3 legal challenges that Stein has filed against Senate Bill 382, which also includes disputes over appointments to the State Highway Patrol and judicial vacancies. These challenges and arguments have been made in court. As we learned earlier this morning from Mitch Kokai over at the John Locke Foundation, there's not been any timetable or timeline that has been set as of yet in regards to these legal challenges. This May the 1st deadline will be here sooner rather than later. We'll keep a very close eye on it this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com, and right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Well, there has been a huge increase in threats against elected officials across the United States. Most recently in the news, U.S. Senator Tom Tillis says those calls of violence have intensified, with his staff releasing a graphic phone call on YouTube earlier this week. These threats include death threats and violent rhetoric, reflecting a growing trend of hostility towards public officials nationwide. Tillis's office has reported numerous threats over the years, but recent incidents are described as escalating. Threats against political figures are rising, with some blaming extreme left groups protesting former President Donald Trump, and at the time it was former President Trump in the 2024 campaign. Media responses have been mixed, with the Charlotte Observer acknowledging the threats, but also noting voters do have fears and some of them may be justified in their actions. A recent protest at Tillis's Greensboro office was organized by a group called Indivisible in Guilford County. Other elected officials, including Representative Chuck Edwards, the Republican out of the 11th Congressional District, and Judge Jefferson Griffin, have also faced threats and harassment. Griffin, who is contesting ballots in a recent election, is one of the individuals seeing those threats there. Legislators in Raleigh are taking action with a proposed bill raising the penalty for threatening local politicians. A West Point report shows that threats against public officials are at an all-time high, with federal charges increasing steadily since 2013. This has been a major trend over the last couple of years, and Senator Tillis promoting some of that publicly and bringing those conversations and discussions to the forefront. You can read additional details over at carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.